Throughout church history, there have been generally two distinct interpretations from Scripture regarding salvation. One is that mankind is morally unable to respond positively to the appeals of God to be reconciled, and thus an effectual or irresistible work of grace is required for the lost to believe. This is sometimes referred to as Calvinism, a more theistic form of determinism. This is in contrast to the more libertarian perspective, which teaches that all fallen humanity remains, or is graciously made, morally able to respond positively or negatively to God's gracious appeals to be reconciled from that fall. The more deterministic or Calvinistic interpretation of Scripture is first introduced by Augustine, a 5th century philosopher from Africa, who converted from Manichaean Gnosticism and did not know Greek or Hebrew. Though Manichaean Gnostic beliefs are very different from Calvinistic Christians, one commonality is the adherence to deterministic philosophy. For instance, John Chrysostom, an early church father prior to Augustine's conversion, wrote in his commentary on John 6:44, quote, "The Manichaeans spring upon these words, saying, quote, that nothing lies in our own power." This demonstrates that the early church fathers saw the interpretation of John 6:44 and other texts from the more deterministic framework to be more Gnostic than Christian. Dr. Ken Wilson, an orthopedic hand surgeon, wrote his Oxford thesis on the subject, demonstrating that Augustine was the first to shift teaching in the early church from a traditional view of free will to a non-free free will, or what is sometimes called compatibilism, a form of determinism. We had the privilege here at Soteriology 101 to host Dr. Ken Wilson to talk about this thesis and the impact that Augustine had upon church history. Dr. James White, a Calvinistic apologist, learned of Dr. Wilson's work and took one of his smaller volumes geared for laymen and began to critique it by making wild generalizations and accusations against Ken Wilson.
I must seek to be as gracious as I possibly can be. I am, however, stunned that this work was granted anything at Oxford at all.
Then, on March 26, Dr. Ken Wilson posted this message, quote, "I'm happy to offer to formally debate White in person with a moderator over my actual Oxford doctrinal thesis when COVID-19 is over. You are welcome to post this online or state it for White. This is a formal challenge to a formal debate before a live audience in a neutral setting." Among the many seemingly elusive replies from Dr. White, one was, quote, "We get debate challenges all the time, sometimes from credible people, often from those searching for credibility. Those who think late March of 2020 is a good time to be jumping on a debate idea are oblivious to the world around them." Ignoring the insinuation that Dr. Wilson lacks credibility as an Oxford graduate and an orthopedic hand surgeon who knows several languages, must we be reminded that just a few days prior, James White challenged Dr. Allen to a debate in Dallas?
I only ask that the debate be a minimum of 3 full hours long between you and I before we get to audience questions. In light of a seminary, this is after the Corona stuff, and we don't want to have just one person per pew. That doesn't work. But let's put accordance up on the screen.
As of April 16th, James White has not agreed to a debate, but instead has resorted to the following diversions and fallacious tactics in addressing the work of Dr. Wilson.
Ken Wilson sends a note to Leighton Flowers that says, "I'm happy to offer to formally debate White in person with a moderator over my actual Oxford doctrinal thesis." Doctrinal or doctoral? Dr. Wilson, which one is it? Because there's lots of doctrine in here, but it's not doctrinal. You didn't bother to argue the doctrine, you just asserted the doctrine. I think you meant doctoral. That's what a doctoral thesis is, right? Actually, it would normally be a doctoral dissertation. But anyway.
For those who may not be aware, in England, where Oxford is located, it is called a thesis, not a dissertation. And by the way, doctrinal research is in reference to traditional methods which concern documents, which is in contrast to non-doctrinal or empirical research, just so you're aware.
Notice what it says, my actual Oxford doctrinal thesis. I'm going to take that to mean not this.
Yeah, I understand that. It's clearly
so
not standing
what
by
does that mean this is, Dr. Wilson? Are you saying in front of everyone that you produced and sell a book that's garbage, misrepresentational, inaccurate, untruthful, and should not be purchased by anyone? Is that what you're saying?
No, obviously that's not what Dr. Wilson or anyone is saying. Dr. Wilson would like to debate you on the scholarly material contained within his actual Oxford thesis because he felt you misrepresented his thesis by making broad, sweeping, outrageous generalizations about the claims in the smaller book produced for laymen.
The author is zealously committed to a full-on, pretty much Pelagian view of free will. And he has a tremendous commitment to finding in history that which will substantiate his thesis. He is horrifically unguarded in his language.
Dr. Wilson does not affirm what is known as Pelagianism. In fact, he outright denies it and speaks out against it, as do we here at Soteriology 101. We agree with this tweet from the armchair theologian who wrote, quote, "It is ironic to me to call people Pelagian who have not even read Pelagius, yet call it horrific to conclude that Augustine read the scriptures similarly to Manichaeans when he was a Manichaean for 10 years of his life." So Dr. White, please tell us about what Augustine believed for a decade as a Manichaean prior to his conversion.
Grace in Manichaeism is pooping out light. You just don't like me pointing that out. But that's what it is. It's pooping out light. So that the little sparks from the veggies you eat can go up and become part of the Milky Way and go to the moon, into the sun, and then into the realm of light. That's grace. If you think that's what we're talking about, that explains why you've been missing stuff so long.
Shouldn't we be a little skeptical of someone who held to this extraordinary belief for a decade of his life? Yet consider the influence of Augustine on Western Christianity as in accordance with Dr. R.C. Sproul of Ligonier Ministries, who wrote, quote, "It has been said that all of Western theology is a footnote to the work of Augustine. This is because no other writer, with the exception of the biblical authors, has had more influence on Christendom. When Martin Luther and John Calvin were accused of teaching new doctrine, they pointed to Augustine as the example of one who had taught the things they were teaching."
So, first of all, anyone who knows anything about Stoics, Gnostics, and Manichaeanism knows that there are differences between each one of these. Manichaeanism is a form of Gnosticism, but with an incredibly wide variety of influences that Mani brought into his self-made religion in the middle of the 3rd century. So in other words, around 250-ish. The point is this: none of them are based upon a monotheistic worldview. None of them are based upon the prophets and apostles. None of them are based upon grammatical historical interpretation of New Testament texts. None of that matters to Ken Wilson, as long as you can draw a parallel.
Dr. Wilson and the rest of us here at Soteriology 101 are well aware of the differences between Gnosticism and modern-day Calvinism, but the point of contention is regarding its similarities with the unique views Augustine first introduced into the Church. James White has yet to address this actual point of contention, and he has avoided the conclusion of even other well-respected Reformed historians. For instance, a well-respected Reformed historian, Lorraine Bettner, wrote, quote, "It may occasion some surprise to discover that the doctrine of predestination was not made a matter of special study until near the end of the 4th century. They, of course, taught that salvation was through Christ, yet they assumed that man had full power to accept or reject the gospel. Despite the conclusion of many Reformed historians, listen to what Dr. White says when I accused him of reading his Calvinistic theology into Clement and the other early church writings. One, he interprets, of course, Clement much like he interprets Paul and the other New Testament authors by assuming, in my estimation, he's assuming that if somebody uses the word elect or the number of the elect or something of that nature, that they must be talking Calvinistically.
Now, did I ever say that Clement was a Calvinist? I've never said it. I've never suggested it. Anyone who listened to what I said, whether I'm talking about Clement, whether I'm talking about the Epistle Diognetus, what have I always said? What do I say about all church writing?
Yet, the day before, James White said this.
This guy is a monergist in the 2nd century. He's a monergist. And Wilson's dissertation requires them all to be what? Synergists.
Once again, James White's not merely contending with Ken Wilson. He's contending with his own Reformed scholars. Again, Lorraine Bettner said, they, the early church fathers, would have denied the doctrine of predestination. They taught a kind of synergism, in which there was a cooperation between grace and free will. Bettner went on to say, quote, this cardinal truth of Christianity, referring to Calvinism, was first clearly seen by Augustine, end quote. Herman Bavinck, another well-respected Calvinistic historian, spoke of the earliest church writings and explained that they believed, quote, though humans had been more or less corrupted by sin, they remained free and were able to accept the proffered grace of God. The church's teaching did not include a doctrine of absolute predestination and irresistible grace, end quote. As you can see, Dr. White's contention is with his own scholars. John Calvin himself, in regard to the early church writings, said, further, even though the Greeks above the rest, and Christendom especially among them, extol the ability of the human will, yet all the ancients, save Augustine, so differ, waver, or speak confusedly on this subject that almost nothing certain can be derived from their writings, end quote. We have presented numerous unbiased scholars from the Reformed tradition to support our findings, but Dr. White has not presented any who support his.
That provisionists are not only anti-Reformed theology, they're anti-Reformation. They are on Rome's side. In the nature of the will, they are not just in the Tiber River, they have put their rope around the dock over on the other side of the Tiber River.
This is a guilt by association argument. So a Unitarian in a debate with James White could say James White is a Trinitarian, and Catholics from Rome, they're Trinitarians. Therefore, James White sides with Rome. He has crossed the Tiber River and docked.
That is so radical that it's astonishing. And it's so full of holes that I'll tell you right now, once we get done with all this, and once these other folks put out their stuff, we're going to be the ones going, so what happened to that debate challenge? Because it ain't going to happen. I already have hours worth of errors in the dissertation. Okay, so something tells me once we put that all out there, and you can go check these sources, and you can look these things up and go, yeah, that is what that says. Wonder why it says differently in there. Then all of a sudden there's going to be a reason why, we don't want to. Yeah, look at the time. I got to go. Got to floss my cat. That's just not going to happen. But it would be interesting. Do you have any idea once we lay all this out, how bad y'all are going to look? This is going to be coronavirus, COVID-19. And the collapse of Soteriology 1.1, the big issues in 2020. Because are you gonna go down swinging?
So why do gorillas pound their chests? Well, male gorillas often behave this way when they want to show their strength. While this may look like a vicious yell, this action actually helps gorillas end or even avoid confrontation with another gorilla, because the gorilla that looks the strongest often scares the other one away without a fight.
Keep in mind, Dr. White is not just contending with Ken Wilson or Leighton Flowers. He is contending with a general consensus among most scholars.
What are you talking about, man?